The number on the screen was not real. It couldn't be. It was a string of digits that belonged in the abstract world of government budgets or astronomical distances, not in a personal trading account. Liam Sterling stared at the glowing green figures, his face impassive. The numbers did not flicker. They were solid, undeniable, and utterly absurd. $8,600,000. He had known this day was coming. He had planned for it, orchestrated parts of it even. But the reality of it, the sheer weight of that comma and all those zeros, landed with a physical force. It was the final punctuation mark on a long and painful chapter of his life. His ex-wife Amelia had thought she had taken everything. She had taken the sprawling house with its sterile, architect-designed gardens. She had taken the portfolio of robust, respectable blue-chip stocks her father had approved of. She had taken the art, the furniture, the shared history, gutting his life like a professional, and she had left him with what she called, in her final act of theatrical condescension, the worthless paper. She didn't know that the worthless paper was a seed, and she had no idea that a storm was coming to water it. Within 6 months, her carefully curated world, built on the illusion of unassailable status, would be shaken to its very foundation, all by the man she thought she had broken. Thank you for being here for this story. It's one that really makes you think about what we value in life and in other people. Before we dive in, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop a comment below and let me know what city or country you're in. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to how it all began. Not with a bang, but with the cold, quiet click of a lawyer's pen. The air in the conference room was the color of money, old, gray, and institutional. It smelled of expensive leather and bitter coffee. On one side of the polished mahogany table sat Amelia, flanked by her father, Marcus Caldwell. They were a portrait of corporate royalty, their postures rigid, their expressions a carefully balanced mixture of boredom and distaste. Amelia's suit was a sharp, unforgiving black, her blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin over her cheekbones. Marcus, a man whose face had settled into a permanent expression of shrewd disapproval, tapped a gold pen against a leather-bound folio. On the other side sat Liam, alone. He wore a simple gray suit that suddenly felt a size too big. His lawyer, a competent but outmatched man named Peterson, shuffled papers with a nervous energy that only seemed to amplify the predatory calm of the opposing side. "So we are agreed," Amelia's lawyer, a man who looked more like a shark than a man, said, his voice smooth as oil. "Mrs. Caldwell Sterling, soon to be Ms. Caldwell, will retain the primary residence, the associated furnishings, and the art collection valued at approximately $1.2 million. Liam nodded, his gaze fixed on a point on the wall just over Amelia's head. He had already agreed to this. The house was no longer a home. It was a museum of their shared failure. "The liquid assets," the shark continued, "specifically the joint investment portfolio, will be transferred in full to Ms. Caldwell." He slid a document across the table. "Valued as of this morning at $742,000. Peterson cleared his throat. Mr. Sterling was under the impression that the assets would be divided. "Liam has no head for it," Amelia cut in, her voice like chipping ice. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him. "He'll just lose it on one of his little projects. This is for the best. It's cleaner." Marcus grunted in agreement. "The boy's a dreamer, not an investor. Let him keep his dreams. We'll keep the capital." The insult was delivered with the casual air of a man stating the weather. Liam's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of muscle that was the only outward sign of the humiliation coiling in his gut. He said nothing. He had learned long ago that arguing with Marcus Caldwell was like arguing with a granite cliff. "There is one final item," Amelia's lawyer said, pulling a single, crisp document from his folio. It was a share certificate. 200,000 shares in a private entity, Etherian Dynamics. Our valuation specialists assess these as effectively worthless. The company is non-trading, pre-revenue, a speculative gamble at best. Ms. Caldwell has no desire to have such an item cluttering her portfolio. Amelia gave a small, cruel smile. It was a smile Liam knew well. It was the one she used just before delivering the killing blow. "You can have them, Liam," she said, her tone dripping with false magnanimity. "A gift, so you don't walk away with nothing." She looked at her lawyer. "Make sure the settlement reflects that. The shares are a gift from me to him. I want that wording." She wanted to brand him with her charity. She wanted the official record to show that his only possession of note was something she had discarded. It was a final, meticulously crafted humiliation. "I see," Liam said. His voice was quiet even. He met her gaze for the first time. He saw no flicker of doubt, no hint of the woman he had once loved. Only the cold, hard certainty of a person who believed they had won. "Then we are done," Marcus declared, snapping his folio shut. He stood up, a dismissal in the very motion. Liam signed the papers. His signature was steady. He didn't look at the clauses giving away the house or the money. He looked only at the final addendum, the one that transferred ownership of Etherian Dynamics. He slid the papers back across the table. Amelia's lawyer handed him a simple, manila envelope containing the share certificate. It felt impossibly light, holding nothing and somehow everything. Liam stood, gave a slight, formal nod that encompassed no one in particular, and walked out of the room. He didn't look back. As the heavy door swung shut behind him, he could hear the low murmur of their voices, the sound of their victory. He walked down the long, marbled corridor, the envelope in his hand, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. They thought they had left him with worthless paper. They had no idea they had just handed him the keys to the future. The memory of that day in the lawyer's office was sharp, but the roots of their disdain ran much deeper. He remembered a dinner, 6 months before the divorce proceedings had even begun, that had served as the true prologue to his exodus. It was a mandatory Sunday gathering at the Caldwell estate, a sprawling Tudor mansion that always felt more like a corporate headquarters than a home. The dining room was Marcus's throne room, a cavern of dark wood and heavy drapery, where a single, massive crystal chandelier hung like a frozen explosion over the 20-foot table. Liam sat beside Amelia, feeling the familiar chill that had settled between them. Across the table, Marcus was holding court, swirling a blood-red claret in his glass, the firelight catching the gold of his signet ring. He was pontificating about the market, about a savvy move he'd made, selling off a tech stock just before it dipped. "It's about instinct, you see," Marcus said, his gaze sweeping the table, landing on Liam with pointed intent. "Not about spreadsheets and fanciful projections. It's a gut feeling. You either have it or you don't." Eleanor, Amelia's mother, a woman who had faded into the background of her own life like a sepia photograph, gave Liam a small, apologetic smile. She was the silent enabler, the quiet witness to her husband's casual cruelties, her inaction a form of complicity that was almost as painful as the insults themselves. "Speaking of fanciful projections," Marcus continued, setting his glass down with a decisive click, "Amelia tells me you've sunk a fair bit of your savings into some new venture. Etherian something or other?" Liam kept his expression neutral. He had known this was coming. Amelia had likely offered up the information as a sacrifice to appease her father. "Etherian Dynamics, yes," he confirmed. "It's a small startup founded by an old university friend, David Chen. They're working on some revolutionary logistics software." Marcus let out a short, barking laugh. "Revolutionary," he echoed, tasting the word with derision. "Every 20-something with a laptop thinks they're revolutionary. What's their revenue? What's their P/E ratio?" "They're pre-revenue," Liam admitted calmly. "It's a long-term play. I believe in David and his team. The technology is groundbreaking." "It's not investing, it's gambling," Marcus declared, waving a dismissive hand. You might as well have taken the money to Vegas. At least there you get a free drink." Amelia, who had been silently observing the exchange, chose that moment to twist the knife. "Liam has always been more of a dreamer, Daddy," she said, her voice light and airy, a tone she used for maximum condescension. "He sees potential everywhere. It's sweet, really, just not very practical." The word sweet was a poison dart. It painted him as naive, as a child playing at business while the adults handled the serious matters of wealth. Liam felt the heat rise in his neck, a familiar burn of impotent anger. He wanted to defend himself, to lay out the meticulous research he had done, the dozens of hours he had spent with David, poring over the code, the business plan, the patent applications. He wanted to tell them that he hadn't just invested money, he had invested his own expertise, helping David refine the very algorithms that made the technology so powerful. But he didn't. He knew it would be pointless. Their minds were closed, sealed tight by the conviction of their own superiority. Anything he said would be twisted into further proof of his foolishness. So, he took a sip of water and offered a quiet, measured response. "Time will tell, Marcus." His calmness seemed to infuriate them more than any argument could have. Marcus stared at him, his eyes narrowed, searching for a crack in the facade. Amelia sighed dramatically, a puff of air that said, "See what I have to put up with?" Later that night, back in the house that was still technically theirs, the silence between them was thick with unspoken resentments. Amelia went to the master suite, closing the door with a quiet finality. Liam walked into his study, the one room in the house that felt like his own. It was lined with books on architecture, engineering, and technology, the architecture of his thoughts. On the wall above his desk, in a simple black frame, was the Ethereum Dynamics share certificate, 200,000 shares. He had framed it not as a trophy, but as a reminder of his belief in a friend, of his faith in an idea, and of the vast, unbridgeable gulf between his world and the world of the Caldwells. He ran a finger along the edge of the frame. To them, it was a joke, a symbol of his financial illiteracy. To him, it was a promise. He looked at the elegant script, the official seal, the stark number printed in the center. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by the evidence of his intellect and passion, the insults of the evening began to fade. They were just noise. The certificate was the signal. It was a quiet testament to a value they could never comprehend, and he would hold on to it, a silent vow against their relentless, corrosive doubt. He knew its worth, even if they never would. And in the end, his knowledge was the only thing that mattered. The months following the finalization of the divorce were a study in contrast. Amelia blossomed in the fertile soil of her reclaimed freedom and wealth. Her social media was a curated gallery of victory, sipping champagne on a yacht in the Mediterranean, laughing with a handsome, square-jawed man at a polo match, cutting the ribbon at a new wing of the Caldwell Foundation. The new man, Julian, was an investment banker cut from the same expensive cloth as her father. He was, in Marcus's words, eminently suitable. Every post was a subtle, carefully aimed dart meant for Liam, a declaration that her life had not only continued without him, but had dramatically improved. Liam, meanwhile, appeared to be in a state of managed decline. He had moved out of the grand, empty house and into a modest two-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable part of the city. It was clean, functional, and anonymous. To the Caldwells and their circle, this was confirmation of their judgment. Liam Sterling, stripped of the Caldwell safety net, was spiraling back to the ordinary station from which they believed he had come. They saw his smaller life as proof of his inherent smallness. One crisp autumn afternoon, the two worlds collided. Liam was walking back from a meeting, carrying a tube of architectural drawings, when he saw them. Amelia and Marcus were stepping out of a black town car in front of a high-end art gallery. Amelia was laughing, her head thrown back, a picture of effortless glamour. She saw him and her smile froze, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. Liam, she said, her tone flat. It wasn't a greeting so much as an acknowledgement of an inconvenient obstacle. Marcus turned, his eyes sweeping over Liam's simple trousers and jacket, the cardboard tube in his hand. A faint, pitying smile touched his lips. Sterling, good to see you're keeping busy. He gestured vaguely at the tube. Still playing with your charts and graphs? Something like that, Liam replied, his voice even. He refused to be baited, refused to let them see any hint of the sting their words caused. I'm consulting on a new urban development project. Ah, consulting, Marcus said, as if the word itself were a euphemism for unemployment. Right, well, every little bit helps, I suppose. Good for you, getting back on your feet. The condescension was suffocating. They spoke to him as if he were a distant, slightly embarrassing relative who had fallen on hard times. Amelia just watched, her arms crossed, her expression a blank mask. She had already moved on. He was a ghost from a past she was actively erasing. It was good to see you both, Liam said, giving a polite nod before continuing on his way. He didn't quicken his pace. He didn't look back. He could feel their eyes on him, their judgment following him down the street. What they couldn't see was the truth of his new life. His apartment wasn't a sign of decline, it was a command center. The second bedroom wasn't empty. It was a state-of-the-art office. The architectural drawings weren't for some minor consulting gig. They were for a new headquarters he was designing, pro bono, for a nonprofit. And his work wasn't every little bit. Later that evening, the illusion of his diminished state would have evaporated for anyone who could see him. He was on a secure video call, not with a minor client, but with David Chen, the CEO of Ethereum Dynamics. The screen showed David in a bustling office, a whiteboard covered in complex equations behind him. The final stress tests on the predictive engine are exceeding all expectations, David said, his face alight with excitement. Your modifications to the core algorithm tripled its efficiency. You're a miracle worker, Liam. You built the engine, David. I just helped with the tune-up, Liam replied, a rare, genuine smile on his face. This was his world. Not the stuffy dinners and vapid social events, but the thrill of creation, of solving impossible problems. A tune-up, he calls it, David laughed. Liam, we're filing 3 new patents based on your work. As we agreed, your name is on all of them as co-inventor. This isn't just your investment anymore, it's your intellectual property. Just make sure the company is protected, Liam said. That's all that matters right now. They talked for another hour, discussing strategy, potential partnerships, and the timeline for their next move. Liam was not just a passive investor waiting for a return. He was a silent partner, a strategic advisor, the secret architect of much of Ethereum's core value. His consulting work was a cover, a way to maintain a low profile while he poured his true energy into the project the Caldwells had so arrogantly dismissed. When the call ended, Liam leaned back in his chair, the city lights twinkling outside his window. He felt a deep, satisfying sense of purpose. Amelia and Marcus saw a man in a small apartment, a failure they had cast off. They had no idea he was sitting in the cockpit of a rocket ship, his hand on the controls, quietly preparing for launch. Their blindness was his greatest asset. The first tremor was almost imperceptible, a faint vibration felt only by those with their ears pressed firmly to the ground of the tech world. It arrived not as a headline in the Wall Street Journal, but as a dense, jargon-filled article in a niche online publication called Quantum Leap Forward. The title was unassuming. Ethereum Dynamics announces breakthrough in AI-driven predictive logistics. The article detailed how a small private company had developed and successfully tested a software suite capable of optimizing supply chains with a staggering 99.8% efficiency, a quantum leap beyond anything currently on the market. It mentioned groundbreaking proprietary algorithms and hinted at patents that would render competitors' technologies obsolete. Liam saw the article the morning it was published. He read it twice, a slow, controlled smile spreading across his face. It was the first shot, fired exactly as planned. He picked up his phone and called David. "It's a good piece," Liam said without preamble. "Well written, technical enough to be credible, exciting enough to get attention." "The phone has been ringing all morning," David's voice crackled with energy. "Venture capitalists, industry analysts, a few reporters who can actually read. The fuse is lit, my friend." "Good. Stick to the plan. No more interviews for now. Let the story build on its own," Liam advised. "How's the other front?" "The government contract. We're in the final review stage. Their internal audit of the tech was flawless. We should have confirmation by the end of the week," David reported. "Once that's public, the rocket fuel ignites." "Let me know the second you hear," Liam said, and ended the call. That day, for the first time in years, the untraded, unlisted shares of Ethereum Dynamics registered a value. A small group of specialist investors who followed the deep tech sector began making inquiries. The unofficial, over-the-counter price moved from the pennies per share valuation the Caldwell's lawyers had assigned it to a speculative 50 cents. Then, by the end of the day, $1. To the world of Marcus Caldwell, this was less than noise. His universe was composed of monolithic corporations, centuries-old banks, and tangible assets like real estate and commodities. A private tech company with no revenue was a phantom, an irrelevant speck in the grand financial cosmos. That afternoon, Marcus was on the 18th hole of his exclusive country club, lining up a putt. His partner, a real estate mogul named Bill, was complaining about a 2-point dip in a major automotive stock. "Market's jittery," Marcus said sagely, his eyes on the ball. "It's a time for steady hands. You don't chase these flashy little tech bubbles. You stay with quality. You stay with what you know." He tapped the ball, and it rolled cleanly into the cup. He smiled, satisfied. He was the master of his universe, secure in his wisdom, completely and blissfully unaware that a financial earthquake was beginning to rumble miles away, centered directly on the man he had so thoroughly written off. Liam, meanwhile, went about his day with a new, almost invisible energy. He went to the gym. He met an old colleague for lunch and listened patiently as the man offered him well-meaning but useless career advice. He bought groceries. On the surface, nothing had changed. But beneath the placid exterior, he was a coiled spring of anticipation. He felt like an architect watching the foundations of a massive skyscraper being poured, knowing that soon the structure would begin its inexorable climb into the sky, visible to all. The world didn't see it yet, but they would. Oh, they would. The story, once confined to the esoteric corners of the tech industry, broke containment. A reporter from a major financial news network, sniffing a human interest angle, connected the dots. The groundbreaking tech, the imminent government contract, the David and Goliath narrative. The headline was irresistible. "The little startup that could. Ethereum Dynamics poised to disrupt billion-dollar industry." The article went viral, and the stock, which had been quietly gathering momentum, exploded. Liam watched from his apartment as the unofficial price on the secondary markets surged. It leaped from $2 to $5 in an hour. By midday, it was touching $10. By the time the markets closed in New York, it was holding steady at $20 a share. It was a feeding frenzy. Every investor who had dismissed it was now scrambling to get a piece. Liam's phone, which had been quiet for months, began to ring incessantly. Old colleagues from his corporate days, friends who hadn't spoken to him since the divorce, even distant relatives. The calls were all the same, a mixture of shock, awe, and a desperate, thinly veiled desire to know if it was too late to get in on the action. Liam answered each call with the same calm, polite detachment. "Yes, it's been an exciting week," he'd say. "The technology is very promising." He offered no details, no advice, no hint of the scale of his own involvement. The news inevitably reached Amelia. She was at a charity brunch, surrounded by women whose lives were as polished and fragile as the champagne flutes in their hands. A friend, a notorious gossip named Chloe, leaned in conspiratorially. "Darling, you will not believe this," she whispered. "You know that little company your ex-husband was so obsessed with? Ethereum something? It's the talk of the town. The stock has gone completely mad. Some people are saying it could be the next big thing." Amelia felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach, but her expression remained one of bored amusement. "Oh, that thing," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Liam was always chasing fantasies. It's a fluke, a bubble. It'll crash by next week. Those little tech things always do." She changed the subject, steering the conversation back to safer, more familiar territory. Vacation plans, the upcoming gala, the flaws of their mutual acquaintances. But for the rest of the brunch, the name Ethereum echoed in the back of her mind, a dissonant and unwelcome note. Marcus heard about it from his personal broker, a man he paid a significant sum to manage his vast, conservative portfolio. "An interesting mover today, Marcus," the broker said over the phone. "Ethereum Dynamics. Came out of nowhere. There's talk of a full buyout from one of the big tech giants. The valuation could be astronomical." "Ethereum?" Marcus repeated, the name jogging a vague, unpleasant memory. "Familiar name. Some little startup, isn't it?" "That's the one. Rumor is they've cracked predictive logistics. If it's true, it's a license to print money," the broker said. "I wish we'd seen it coming." Marcus grunted, a flicker of professional irritation passing through him. He hated missing an opportunity, but the connection still didn't click. He had dismissed so many of Liam's fanciful projects over the years that they had all blended into a single gray smear of foolishness in his memory. He filed the information away as an anomaly and moved on. In his quiet apartment, Liam ignored the ringing phone. He stood at the window, not looking at the city, but at the reflection of his own calm face. He did the math in his head, a simple calculation that felt anything but. 200,000 shares at $20 a share, $4 million. It was a life-changing amount of money. He could sell now, walk away with a fortune that would silence any critic. But he didn't sell. He knew this wasn't the endgame. The government contract hadn't even been officially announced, and beyond that, the acquisition talks were entering their final, critical phase. David had called him an hour earlier. The offer on the table was more than double the current market speculation. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle. It was about the smug, dismissive look on Marcus's face. It was about the cold, cutting cruelty in Amelia's voice when she'd gifted him the worthless paper. This was about the final, unavoidable collision of their world and his. He walked over to his desk and picked up a framed photograph. It was of him and Amelia, years ago, on a trip to Italy. They were smiling, happy, a lifetime away from the cold conference room and the bitter end. He looked at it for a long moment, then placed it face down in a drawer. That part of his life was over. He then pulled out the divorce decree. He smoothed the creased paper, his eyes finding the specific addendum. The asset known as 200,000 shares of Ethereum Dynamics, having negligible value, is hereby transferred as a gift from Ms. Caldwell to Mr. Sterling. A gift. He smiled, a thin, humorless smile. It was time to deliver his thank you note. The annual Caldwell Foundation Charity Gala was the crown jewel of the family's social calendar, a night where the city's elite gathered to celebrate their own generosity. It was an exercise in performative philanthropy, held in the grand ballroom of the city's most expensive hotel. The room glittered, awash in the light of crystal chandeliers and the flash of diamonds. The air was thick with perfume and the low hum of self-congratulation. Liam, of course, had not been invited. His name had been surgically removed from the Caldwell's world. But the gala was, after all, a public charity event. Tickets were available to anyone with $5,000 to spare for a plate of mediocre salmon and the privilege of breathing the same air as the city's power brokers. He paid online, using a new credit card linked to a bank account the Caldwells knew nothing about. When he arrived, the effect was exactly as he had anticipated. His presence was a stone dropped into a still, shallow pond. Ripples of whispers spread through the room. Is that? I thought he and Amelia. What is he doing here? He ignored them. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, the kind of quiet, understated elegance that speaks of confidence rather than a need for attention. He didn't look like a man who had been cast out. He looked like a man who owned the room. He took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and stood near a marble column, observing the scene with a placid, unreadable expression. It didn't take long for Amelia to spot him. She was standing with Julian, her new partner, holding court near the stage. Her laughter died in her throat. A mask of cold fury descended over her features. She excused herself and began to weave through the crowd towards him, a shark closing in on an unwelcome guest in her reef. Liam. Her voice was a low, dangerous hiss. What in God's name are you doing here? Amelia, he said, his voice calm and even. He took a slow sip of his champagne. It's a charity event. I bought a ticket. I'm supporting the foundation. Don't play games with me, she snapped, her eyes scanning the room, paranoid about who was watching. You're here to cause a scene, to embarrass me. Just then, Marcus arrived, his face a thundercloud of indignation. Julian trailed behind him, looking confused and slightly alarmed. I was just about to have security remove you, Marcus growled. You have an incredible amount of nerve showing your face here. I have no intention of causing a scene, Liam said, his gaze steady, moving from Marcus's angry face to Amelia's. But I do have something to discuss with you. A private matter. We have nothing to discuss, Amelia said, her voice rising slightly. Our lawyers have discussed everything. Now I want you to leave. Quietly. I don't think you do, Liam said softly. The quietness of his voice was more commanding than any shout. This is a conversation you're going to want to have. It concerns an asset from our settlement. A gift, as I recall. The word gift hung in the air between them. Amelia's eyes narrowed. The mention of the settlement, of that final triumphant moment in the lawyer's office, piqued her curiosity and her arrogance. She was confident she held all the cards. What could he possibly have to say? Fine, she said, making a snap decision. She gestured towards a small, secluded alcove near the terrace, partially hidden by a large potted palm. There, 5 minutes, then you're gone. Of course, Liam said with a slight, almost imperceptible smile. He followed them as they moved towards the alcove. As they went, he saw Eleanor, Amelia's mother, watching them from across the room. Her face was etched with worry. She had seen this dynamic play out 1,000 times. Her husband and daughter, a united front of aggressive certainty, and a target in their sights. Seeing the confrontation beginning, she started to move hesitantly in their direction, a silent observer drawn to the impending impact. The quiet before the storm was over. The first drops of rain had begun to fall. The alcove was an island of relative quiet in the sea of noise. The music of the string quartet was a distant, elegant murmur. Amelia, impatient and angry, did not wait for them to settle. She whirled on Liam, her arms crossed, her entire posture a challenge. All right, you have your audience, she began, her voice dripping with scorn. What is this about? Did you come here to beg for a handout? Did your little stock have its lucky week and now you want to gloat about making a few $1,000s before it crashes back to nothing? Marcus, standing beside her like a granite bodyguard, chimed in, his tone avuncular and condescending. Listen, Liam, I've seen these bubbles before. The market corrects itself. A fluke is a fluke. If you were smart, you'd have sold yesterday and made enough to cover your rent for a year. It would have been the first sound financial decision of your life. Now you've had your fun. Time to go. Liam listened, his expression unchanged. He let their words fall into the space between them, let the full weight of their arrogance and dismissiveness settle in the air. He held his champagne flute, not drinking from it, just holding it, a cool, solid anchor in the storm of their contempt. This was the moment, the one he had replayed in his mind 100 times. This was the moment for the list of grievances. "A few $1,000s," he repeated softly. The words were not a question, but a quiet echo. He turned his gaze to Marcus. "You know, Marcus, I remember a dinner at your house. You looked me in the eye and called my investment a child's gamble. You said I didn't understand how real wealth was built, that it required instinct, which you had, and I, presumably, did not." Marcus's expression tightened. He remembered. Liam then turned to Amelia. Her face was a mask of impatient fury. "And you, Amelia? I remember the lawyer's office. The air smelled like old paper and victory. Your victory. You looked at me and you said, 'Keep your worthless paper, Liam. It suits you.' You made your lawyer write it into the decree that way. A gift. You wanted it recorded for posterity that you had bestowed upon me something you considered garbage." "It was garbage," she spat. "It still is. A lottery ticket that happened to pay out a pittance." "Was it?" Liam asked, a genuine, almost academic curiosity in his voice. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. For a heart-stopping moment, they probably thought he was reaching for the old paper certificate itself. Instead, he pulled out his phone. The screen was dark. He didn't turn it on yet. He let the suspense build, a silence stretching taut between them. Eleanor had arrived at the edge of the alcove, her hand fluttering at her throat, a silent, anxious spectator. "The bubble didn't pop, Marcus," Liam said, his voice dropping even lower, forcing them to lean in. "And it wasn't a lottery ticket, Amelia. This morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Omni Digital, the third largest tech conglomerate in the world, announced a full acquisition of Ethereum Dynamics." He paused. He could see the first flicker of confusion in their eyes. The name Omni Digital was one even Marcus respected. "They weren't interested in its revenue," Liam continued. "They were interested in its intellectual property, specifically a suite of patented algorithms for predictive logistics, algorithms I helped co-develop." This was a new piece of information, a small, sharp shock. Amelia's mouth opened slightly. The final acquisition price wasn't based on speculation or market hype. It was a cash buyout, a fixed price per share, he said. He looked from Amelia's stunned face to Marcus's suddenly rigid one. The price was $43 per share. He saw the gears turning in Marcus's head. The older man was quick with numbers, a human calculator, but his face was blank, as if the calculation was producing a result so impossible his brain refused to process it. Amelia just stared, uncomprehending. The number meant nothing to her without context. Liam decided to provide it. He looked directly at her, his voice devoid of triumph, speaking with the simple clarity of a man stating a fact. "You gifted me 200,000 shares, Amelia." He let the two pieces of information connect in the air. 200,000 shares, $43 a share. He turned on his phone screen. It wasn't the stock market ticker. It was a banking app showing a wire transfer confirmation. He held it out. The number glowed in the dim light of the alcove, stark and irrefutable. "That comes to $8,600,000. The transfer cleared my account this afternoon." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air, the music, the very life out of the space. The number hung there, an indictment, a monument, a tombstone for their arrogance. Marcus stared at the phone, his face draining of all color, his mouth slightly agape. He looked like a statue that had just been told it was made of sand. Amelia's reaction was slower, then all at once. Her perfectly composed face seemed to shatter from within. It wasn't a single expression, but a rapid-fire cascade of them: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, a raw, ugly panic. "No," she whispered, the word a dry rasp. "No, that's a lie. It's a trick." She looked desperately at her father, seeking confirmation, seeking the familiar anchor of his authority. But Marcus was lost, adrift in a sea of impossible zeros. That money, Marcus stammered, his voice a hoarse croak. He finally tore his eyes from the phone screen to glare at Liam. The old fire of his authority was gone, replaced by a desperate, grasping greed. That's community property. We were married when you bought it. It's half hers. It's half ours. Liam slowly shook his head, his calmness a stark contrast to their unraveling. No, Marcus, you made absolutely sure of that. Your lawyers, he said, emphasizing the word, were extraordinarily thorough. They built a fortress around Amelia's assets, and in doing so, they built one around mine. He turned his gaze back to Amelia. The divorce was final 3 months ago. All assets were divided and sealed. And these shares, specifically, you didn't just give them to me, you disavowed them. You signed a document declaring them worthless and designated them as a gift to ensure they could never be considered a shared marital asset. You did that to humiliate me. You wanted to be certain that my worthless paper could never taint your real portfolio. Your own vanity, your own cruelty was my greatest legal protection. It's all there in the final decree, your signature right at the bottom. The truth of it, the poetic justice of it, was more devastating than the number itself. She had authored her own financial ruin out of pure spite. The fight went out of her. Her body seemed to sag, the rigid posture dissolving. The anger and arrogance were gone, replaced by a terrifying, bottomless despair. Liam, she breathed, taking a stumbling step toward him. Her face was a mess of desperation. Liam, please, it was a mistake. I was angry. I was hurt. I wasn't thinking clearly. We can fix this, please. The transformation was grotesque. The imperious queen was now a beggar, her pleas stripped of all dignity. It was then that Eleanor, who had been frozen at the edge of the alcove, finally moved. She stepped forward and put a firm hand on her daughter's arm, stopping her advance. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. She looked at Amelia's pleading face, then at Liam's quiet, resolute one. Amelia, stop, she said, her voice trembling but firm. Just stop it. He's right. She turned to Liam, her eyes filled not with the pity he was used to, but with a profound and sorrowful respect. He's right, Amelia. We did this. You did this. Marcus, however, was not ready to surrender. The instincts of a lifetime of bullying and litigation were kicking in. I'll call my lawyers, he snarled, jabbing a finger at Liam. There are legal avenues, duress, unconscionable contracts. I will bury you in appeals. Liam didn't even flinch. He simply looked at Marcus with an expression of mild regret. Your lawyers, Marcus? He asked quietly. You mean the firm of Albright, Spector, and Cole? Excellent firm. Very thorough. I was so impressed with their work on my divorce, in fact, that I retained them myself last week. They're my counsel now. He let that final, quiet bomb detonate in the silence. The look on Marcus's face was something Liam would never forget. It was the look of a king who had just realized his castle was made of dust, and the man he had banished was the only one who controlled the wind. The fight didn't just leave him, it was ripped out of him, leaving a hollow, defeated old man in its place. The reversal was total. The power had not just shifted, it had undergone a tectonic upheaval. The chess match was over. Checkmate. The weeks that followed the gala were a slow-motion demolition. The story, too delicious and too dramatic to be contained, leaked out. It started as whispers in the exclusive clubs and salons the Caldwells frequented, then bloomed into a full-blown scandal dissected by gossip columnists and financial bloggers. The narrative was brutal and simple. The infallible Marcus Caldwell and his glamorous daughter had, through sheer arrogance, thrown away a fortune and handed it to the very man they despised. For a family whose identity was welded to the perception of shrewdness and superiority, the public humiliation was a mortal wound. Their power was not just in their money, but in the myth of their invincibility. That myth was now shattered, and they were revealed to be not gods, but fools. Amelia's life, so carefully constructed on a foundation of wealth and status, crumbled first. Julian, the eminently suitable investment banker, quietly and quickly distanced himself. He was a man attracted to power and prestige, and Amelia had suddenly become a symbol of a colossal misjudgment. She was no longer a prize, she was a cautionary tale. Their engagement was broken within a fortnight. The friends who had flocked to her side vanished, their invitations drying up. To be seen with her was to be tainted by her failure. Marcus's fall was less public, but more profound. His business was built on his reputation as a financial oracle. How could a man advise others on their fortunes when he had failed to recognize an $8 million opportunity in his own home? His partners grew wary. Clients became hesitant. He became insular and paranoid, second-guessing every decision, seeing shadows of his own fallibility in every market fluctuation. The casual confidence that had been his armor was gone, leaving him exposed and uncertain. And Liam? Liam did none of the things they would have done. He didn't buy a gaudy mansion or a fleet of exotic cars. He didn't appear on the cover of magazines. He remained in his modest apartment, which now seemed less a sign of diminishment and more one of quiet, unshakable confidence. He didn't need the trappings of wealth to validate him. His worth was, and always had been, internal. His first major act was not one of consumption, but of creation. He used $2 million of the money to establish the Ethereum Foundation. Its mission was simple and deeply personal: to provide seed funding and mentorship to brilliant, unconventional tech entrepreneurs who were overlooked by traditional venture capital. He was using the fruits of their blindness to give sight to others. The justice was not just poetic, it was generative. He was building a legacy on the ashes of their arrogance. Amelia tried to contact him. The calls came first, which he let go to voicemail. Then the texts, long, rambling messages that veered wildly between tearful apologies, bitter accusations, and desperate pleas. Finally, the emails, novels of regret and revised history. He read one. In it, she tried to recast their entire relationship, painting herself as a victim of her father's influence, a woman who had always loved him but was too weak to stand up for him. It was a performance, another attempt at manipulation. He listened to a single, sobbing voicemail, then deleted the entire thread and blocked her number. His silence, he knew, was a more profound response than any argument he could offer. There was simply nothing left to say. One afternoon, Eleanor Caldwell requested to meet him. He agreed, suggesting a bench in a public park, a neutral ground far from the ghosts of their past. She arrived looking older, the effortless elegance replaced by a visible weariness. She didn't offer excuses or pleas on Amelia's behalf. She simply sat beside him on the bench, watching the children play on the swings. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally, her voice quiet but clear. "Not for them, for me. I saw how they treated you for years. I saw your patience, your dignity, and I said nothing. I chose peace over principle. That was my failure, and I am deeply sorry for it." Liam looked at her. He saw genuine remorse in her eyes, the pain of a woman who had finally woken up from a long, gilded slumber. This was different from Amelia's desperate bargaining or Marcus's sputtering rage. This was real. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said, and he meant it. "I accept your apology." In that moment of shared, quiet truth, he felt a sense of release. His quest had never been about pure revenge. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the dignity that they had tried so hard to strip from him. Forgiving Eleanor was not a betrayal of that quest. It was its fulfillment. It proved that he could wield his newfound power with grace, that he hadn't been corrupted by the very attitudes he had fought against. He could see true remorse and honor it, separating the enabler who had found her conscience from the architects of the pain who had not. 6 months after the gala, the city was settling into a new reality. Liam stood on a stage in a brightly lit, open-plan office space, the first incubator funded by the Ethereum Foundation. The room was buzzing with the energy of young, hopeful entrepreneurs, the very kind of people Marcus Caldwell would have dismissed out of hand. Liam was giving the opening address. He wore a simple, well-cut blazer and an open-collared shirt. He looked relaxed, confident, and utterly at home. He spoke not of money or acquisitions, but of passion and potential. True value is often hidden in plain sight, he said, his voice resonating with quiet authority. It's in the idea that everyone tells you is impossible. It's in the project that seems too small to matter. It's in the person that everyone else underestimates. Our mission here is simple: to look for that hidden value, to nurture it, to protect it, and to give it the chance to change the world. The applause was thunderous, filled with genuine admiration and hope. He had found his true calling, not as a corporate player or a wealthy recluse, but as a builder of dreams for others. Miles away, in a small generic office cubicle, Amelia Caldwell, she had dropped the sterling name as if it were on fire, scrolled through a news feed on her lunch break. She had taken a job, a real 9-to-5 administrative position at a mid-level insurance firm. It was humbling, anonymous work. Her father, after losing a significant portion of his own fortune in a series of rash, panicked investments following his humiliation, could no longer support her lavish lifestyle. She stopped at an article with a picture of Liam on stage. The headline read, "Liam Sterling's Ethereum Foundation opens first incubator, pledges to fund the unfundable." She read the first few paragraphs, her expression unreadable. There was a flicker of the old bitterness, a shadow of regret so profound it was almost physical. But there was something else too, faint and fragile, a dawning understanding. She had spent her life judging people by their balance sheets, by the names on their invitations, by the labels on their clothes. Liam had just been the first to hold up a mirror and force her to see the poverty of that worldview. Her redemption was not guaranteed. It was a long, hard road ahead, one she would have to walk alone. But for the first time, she was being forced to find a worth within herself that had nothing to do with her name or her father's money. Later that evening, Liam stood on the small balcony of his apartment. He wasn't thinking about the money, now safely invested in working to build things he believed in. He was thinking about the journey. He realized now that the money had never been the prize. It was just a tool. It was a crowbar to pry open a locked door, a spotlight to illuminate a hidden truth. The real victory wasn't the number in his bank account. It was the quiet, unshakable knowledge of his own worth. A worth that had existed long before the acquisition and would exist long after the money was gone. He had faced their scorn with integrity and their pleading with grace. He had not become them. He had simply, finally, become himself. The real fortune was not the $8.6 million. It was the freedom he now had to live a life of purpose, defined not by what others thought of him, but by the value he could create in the world. So, what do you think of Liam's journey? Was he right to completely cut Amelia and Marcus out of his life? Or should he have shown some measure of mercy? What would you have done with that kind of life-changing money? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see the different perspectives on stories like this. If you found this story compelling, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more tales of justice and redemption. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you in the next story.